My Lords, I speak chiefly to Amendment 184, tabled by the noble Baroness Lady Burt of Solihull and also signed by the noble Lady Baroness Massey of Darwin. And I should also declare my position as a Vice President of the Local Government Association. And I think it is very important that the government consider this specific issue of teenage relationships abuse and the need to provide services and support to deal with the issue. And I would stress that the amendment talks about sufficient levels of local authority service provision. Of course, we know how stretched local authorities are, and the need for resources attached to that as well. But I think when we're looking at this issue, it's very telling that a lot of the research in this area has come in the last couple of years. And a lot of the research and work has been done by NGOs and campaigning groups, and indeed a lot of the education work also. And I note the excellent Women's Aid #LoveRespect campaign and research around that, which found that a third of teenage girls knew that they'd been in an abusive relationship. However, when the remaining two-thirds were asked more detailed questions, it became clear that more than half of them had in fact experienced abusive behaviour, but they hadn't recognised it as such. Going to the actual words of someone of experience, Women's Aid quotes its ambassador, the personal trainer, author and social media influencer Alice Liveling, who said, "When I was 16, I found myself in an abusive relationship and felt so isolated and alone. I didn't think that abuse happened to young people. And to be honest, I had no idea that what I was experiencing was even abuse for a long time." I look also to the excellent work of the group Safe Lives. They quote the Crime Survey for England from 2015, reporting that 6.6% of males and 12.6% of females aged 16 to 19 had experienced domestic abuse in the past year. And also a survey of 13 to 17-year-olds, which found that 25% of girls and 18% of boys had experienced some form of physical abuse in a relationship, with the highest level of severity being no different to adults. To further add to the evidence on this, the research project Boys to Men found that 49% of boys and 33% of girls aged 13 to 14 thought that hitting a partner would be, quotes, okay, in at least one of 12 scenarios they were presented with. We clearly have a problem here, my lords, and it's really important, I believe, that the Domestic Abuse Bill acknowledges this and accepts that there's a need to provide resources to deal with it. Just very briefly, I'd also like to address Amendment 180 in the name of the noble lady Baroness Meacher and others. And I note that in introducing it, the noble lady did acknowledge that the wording perhaps needed some work. And I do find some of it rather surprising, although I think in Clause C, the acknowledgement, the push for increased mental health support in primary schools is certainly something that's very important to raise, given our epidemic of mental ill health that's only been growing in our deeply unhealthy society. I think also Clause D in this amendment doesn't really acknowledge the fact that the government has indeed brought in compulsory sex and relationship education. And I know a great deal about that because in the other place, my honourable friend, the member for Brighton Pavilion, has been at the absolute forefront of pushing for fully inclusive, age-appropriate relationship and sex education. However, I do find in that amendment, the final element of it, rather curious in the focus on marriage. I think the privileging of one form of relationship over another in education is not a constructive approach. Now, I hope your Lordship's House will forgive me just a brief moment of a final reflection, given we're coming to the end of the sixth day of discussion of this very important bill. And I think the debate's been thoughtful, thorough, and I hope very useful to the government to go away and consider. But I wanted to reflect on the words of the noble Lord Paddock in the debate on Amendment 173. And he was paying tribute to all the feminist campaigners who came before us, who brought us to this point. And that led me to look back over the history of misogyny in your Lordship's House, which drew me rather quickly to one of our predecessors, Lord Curzon, a man against whom many charges might be laid. But Lord Curzon was little more than a century ago the author of a pamphlet giving 15 reasons against women's suffrage. Now, I know that one of his descendants is with us today, and I won't hold his family heritage against him. But I think there's an important lesson to be drawn from that reflection on history. That lesson is that campaigning works. Over decades, feminist campaigners have transformed the place of women in society. This bill is an important reflection of that. And I think that's something that we can take into the report stage to fortify us for the debates ahead with this truly important bill. Thank you, my lords.